November 29th, 1973.
Historical Society. I'm sorry about the change of date last week to this week. But I know that some people are not able to come tonight because of, for example, the Retirement Home Center dinner. But we had two problems. First of all, we were unable to get anyone to speak for last Wednesday, and or at least without great inconvenience. And second of all, a number of people said, "Gee, you can't have a meeting the night before Thanksgiving. People are going to be cooking, they're going to be away, and whatnot." This is not going to be our normal practice. Normally we are on the third Wednesday of the month. I'm not sure, and I'll ask for any suggestions now as to whether we should have a meeting in December.
I haven't been here for the past two meetings because I was taking a course sponsored by Justice Community College on Hudson River Valley architecture. The course was given in Rhinebeck, one of the satellite schools of the community, and it cost $12. For that $12, people who took it certainly got their money for it. What I'm going to do is sort of report on this course, because if they gave it in the fall in Rhinebeck, maybe next year they could give it in Millbrook or Stanfordville, because it's a very, very useful course. One thing I'd like to do is pass out a couple of things we've got. The first is a handout called Historic Architecture of the Hudson Valley. And on it is a summary of all the organizations that deal with history that we can write away to or be connected with at the national level, the state level, the county level, the local level. The Washington Historical Society and a few others are left out, but they do have 9 at the local level, plus a couple of others. It's a useful document in case some of you are looking for organizations and haven't come across some of them mentioned here. Also, one of the people who took the course was involved in publishing books that pertain to the history of the Hudson River Valley, and we sort of had a little a book sale. This organization is the Hicks, so I'll pass the brochure out because it's so readily available to us. There's a similar organization in Ulster County. If you go through here, you'll find most of the books, just about every book that's been printed in the last 15 years on Dutchess County, Ulster County, and the surrounding area. The books are divided into different sections. The first one is called Hudson River Lore. The next one is called Regional Lore, County Histories, Natural History, Architecture, Fine Arts, Technology, Hiking, Touring, Addenda. Then the books are described in a short paragraph. This I found to be very useful in what some of their books, and if some of you want to replenish your libraries at this time of the year, this will be one place to where you can contact and get your books very quickly. Of course, bookstores do carry this, but this is sort of a collecting house service. I think it's just about a non-profit service. They don't get to make money out of it. Then the third thing is the main book we use, and I think some of you bought it last year when Landmarks met on Route 44. It only costs about $4, and it's the most useful $4 because in it are most of the useful historical sites that are still existing in Dutchess County. If you haven't seen the book, I'm taking a few seconds by calling to your attention, but I assume most of you have. But for those who haven't, why don't you take a look at it? You can buy it in a couple of places. One is through here, another is you can buy it through Dutchess County itself, through the planning board. I think you can buy it through the local bookstore. And it is very, very inexpensive for what you get. If you're interested, I can contact the fellow who handles this operation, and he does make himself available. You can come out, say, with 20 or 30 books. In other words, you could spend 10 or 15 minutes as a selection, I think, you know. But I don't want to push that too far because these books may be available in other places. This is the one place I think within 40 miles of where all these books are yet. Most of them are in stock. Some of them are out of print. I have here something that's been around the high school for about 35 years. It was made in the mid-1930s by the art project of the carried out by the Works Progress Administration. On the top there's on the bottom there's a little marker that says Federal Art Project, and they beautified places throughout the country. For example, the post offices along Route 9 in Rhinebeck and Hyde Park were built by President Roosevelt sort of as a present to Dutchess County, and they're beautifully decorated by specially chosen painters. This must have taken a long time to cut out, and it shows the road pattern as of the mid-1930s. And what I've done is put some yarn on it to indicate a few possible tours, because after 6 classes, we went out and toured around Dutchess and Ulster County. We didn't have time to tour around Columbia County or the western part of Connecticut. But the purpose of the course is to sort of generate interest in this kind of thing, and those of us who took this course were stimulated because we sat down for 2 hours at a time. We learned from a man hired by Dutchess Community College who lived across the river in Rosendale in 18th century home. And Art Hopkins spends all his time renovating houses, so he's a full-time professional in the field. And he talked about 17th and 18th, 19th century architecture, and basically what you do with a house in order to make it habitable. After talking, he took us out along this route. We didn't go along the black route, but I put that because it would be a useful example of a touring route in this area. In the back of this book, published by the Dutchess County Planning Association, they have 3 or 4 tours. And these tours are sort of modified versions of theirs. So you have that book, you have a couple of tours already drawn up for you. And one other thought comes to mind, and that is last year, David and I were talking about a bicycle touring guide. We never had enough time to put all our notes together. Hopefully we'll get it done this year. But a bicycling tour guide, perhaps of this area, the area right around us, maybe expanded, is sort of the same thing. To get out and see the land around us, to get a feeling for how beautiful the land is, and the buildings that do much for the landscape rather than buildings that scar the landscape. Best examples being some of the newer structures put in like here or thank you so much. That works. That's going on here. It works. Why don't we not push our luck? I'm holding a bean to hold me. I think that's enough light to accompany by the group tour. Keep going up. Okay. I was just about making a comparison between some of the beautiful structures that you see on such tours compared to a couple of the newer buildings in Poughkeepsie, which are extremely ugly. Not the ones right by the water, but the ones down. Getting out, whether it's a teacher taking students or whether it's a group of interested citizens going around the county, is an excellent thing in my opinion. And the advantage of this course is that for very little money, in fact, it turns out that the community college lost a lot on it because the buses were expensive. But for a fairly small sum per person, you can see a lot. And one day, we saw all of this. And 2 weeks ago, we saw most of Ulster County. We drove for about 150 miles. It's not too exerting also because you're sitting in a bus. And most of the time, you're looking out the window with the guy, Art Hopkins in this case, telling you to look right, look left. And since the bus drivers thought nothing of slowing down to 15 or 20 miles an hour, and you just can't do this in your car because in a bus you're insulated from drivers honking at you. So it really worked out well, and we all had a very enjoyable time. We were tired because we saw a tremendous amount, but we weren't tired from the point of view of having to lug stuff around or running here or there. The bus deposited here and there. We began in the tour around Dutchess County at the college and went through Poughkeepsie, and I'm just going to spend about 5 minutes going around this tour, which is one anybody can make, and then I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about this being, I think, the most interesting tour, beginning in Millbrook and going around for about 35 miles. If you have any comments you would like to make while I'm doing this, please feel free to make them. I'm sort of going to give you a general idea of what can be seen in such a tour, with the point that maybe in the spring, around May, maybe a bunch of us would like to do it. You have 20, 25 people in a bus, it would only cost a couple of dollars a piece. Of course, it depends on what kind of bus, how long you're going to occupy the bus. The advantage of the bus, of course, is that in this time of gas consciousness, you are being efficient. You're all going together. So you don't know what's going to happen by spring, but hopefully there still will be some kind of mass transportation available to us. It's just an idea. Some historical societies do it. The Farm and Home Center does it in terms of touring and seeing various farms in the area. And the point I'm making is that maybe us as a group, certainly the course I was in, a bunch of people getting together, we had a great time out of the classroom, even more than in the classroom. Starting at Poughkeepsie, we spent about an hour and a half going through Poughkeepsie. Maybe some of you have taken a tour around the historical area of Poughkeepsie. Part of downtown Poughkeepsie is a National Historical Area on the register. We spent time walking through downtown Poughkeepsie and then went out by Springside, which is being developed right now. So most of the Vassar estate is non-existent except for a good example, one of the meat houses. Then, and this from here, including about an hour and a half to Poughkeepsie and all the way around to the Beekman Arms, took us from 9:30 until 1 o'clock. You get an idea of how much you can do in a limited period. We went down Route 9 through the village of Wappingers Falls. We stopped very briefly for a couple of minutes at the Messier homestead, and this is a good example of 18th century architecture. We looked at the dam in Wappingers Falls. Our guide pointed out a few factories along the creek and explained the early history of Wappingers Falls. And then we cut through towards Fishtail. We saw a few good examples of 18th century architecture. There were a couple of Georgian houses along the road. And then we cut into the village of Fishkill and saw the two churches. On the left-hand side, as you're pointing towards the northeast, is the First Reformed Church, and across Route 9 is Trinity Church. And in the bus, looked out, spent a couple of minutes listening to an explanation of each church. And I assume most of you, maybe all of you, have seen at one time or another all of these. But what we did was sort of do it from a systematic viewpoint here in Ulster, here in Dutchess County, concentrating on 18th century and 19th century architecture. While in Ulster County, there was a lot of 17th century architecture. We spent about an hour and a half in Newport. The place to see it, taking the tour around the Huguenot Street houses. We went up 82 towards Burbank and went past the two Brinkerhoff homes. We stopped. We didn't have time to take a tour, but if you have a large group, it's possible. It's very easy to get tours of houses that are not normally open. We wanted to have this kind of discussion at this point in our history of the organization. In the last 2 months, we've laid, I think, some very good groundwork in terms of historical discussion of this area. The first month we had a speaker on the geology of this town of Washington, of that county, the basic landform, which has formed the basis for all life in this area. Second month, last month in October, we had a speaker who discussed vegetation and animal life in the area. Again, starting with this basic geologic foundation, what happens? Well, you get, considering some factors as temperature and climate and rainfall, you get the plant and animal life which we have here today, and which has been here for the most part for many, many years. The next step in looking at the history of this area is the first human inhabitants, who were, of course, the Indians. Now, I'm not going to talk at all about the Aboriginal Indians. I've been told there were Indians here as far back as 10,000 BC, perhaps. My information is limited to the Algonquins and their various tribes, let's call them, groups of Indians. The Wappingers, which is the best known in this area. There are apparently some digs going on down in the Pittsfield area, which I hoped I could get a speaker from there to come up. That didn't come through for various reasons. In any case, I wanted to bring a white pine tonight, because the white pine is the symbol of the Iroquois Federation. I'm sure those of you who are familiar with history know that the white pine has, as one of its distinguishing features, 5 needles. And the 5 needles stood for the 5 nations which made up the Iroquois Federation. Now, the Iroquois in the New York State, in this whole area, are newcomers. There are people who, like the Algonquins before them, came from the west, but they came quite recently and didn't come down this far. But they, of course, seriously affected all of the Arctic, all of this whole area. I brought a textbook, a typical New York State textbook. Those of you who were brought up in the schools around here, I'm sure, in 7th grade or perhaps in high school or 8th grade, studied New York State history. A textbook like this is one of the reasons why I became interested in local history, because it has virtually very little relevance to this area. Chapter 3, the Iroquois, people of the Longhouse. It spends this part of one page and down to here talking about the non-Iroquois Indians in New York State, and spends the rest of the chapter talking about the Iroquois, which is all fine and well except we didn't have any. And trying to compare them would be like comparing the Germans and the French. You would have to find that very the Iroquois were very warlike. And you saw this in the white man's history here. The Iroquois had, of course, famous longhouses, and they had stockades around their villages. And evidently a very warlike people. They came into this area, conquered the people who were living here. After the white man had come, they subsequently went on to conquer Indians
around Lake Ontario, the Huron Indians, because when the white man came, he wanted to part the furs the Indians to provide, and in return gave the Indians fire, water, clothing, food, ammunition, guns, tomahawks, all sorts of things in return. Well, after 30 or 40 years, the beavers and other furs in the Iroquois territory got sort of depleted, and the Iroquois went north and conquered the Huron. However, to dwell on the Iroquois for too long makes us forget about the Algonquin, who were here before the Iroquois and who were the Indians who inhabited Hudson County. Basically, the Wampanoag Indians, also the Mohegans. So M-A-H-I-C-A-N-S or M-O? M-O? Both. Some spelled one way, some spelled the other. Not the Mohawk Indians, but the Mohegans. Completely different and not related to the Iroquois. These Indians were considerably different. Whereas the Iroquois were warlike, the Algonquin Indians were much more peaceful. They didn't have stockades, they weren't great fighters, they were more tied to land. Now, I don't want to oversimplify here, because both the Iroquois and the Algonquin had many similarities. Talking out solely about the Algonquin and the whole way they lived. They generally made their villages on the banks of streams, even more so where streams came together. You get your drinking water from one stream, you could wash your clothes from the other, or maybe the other. You think those of you who had outhouses had it wrong. That's just thinking of that anyway. And there were numerous Indian tribes in this area. One of the books that our Historical Society has shows a number of different sites, which are probably only the most recent sites, because after 20 years or less of living in one area, it got pretty much depleted, much as unscientific farming today robs the land. They didn't know really that much about fertilizer and various things like this. They would live in an area and grow different crops, corn and peas and things. And after a while, the area would get depleted, not just the soil, but the wood supplies would get there. They would walk up another area. You could find, I'm sure, walking around the field, especially in spring, in the same arrowhead. There was a fellow who gave a talk in the Uniondale Historical Society a while ago. He had a large collection of arrowheads. And just this general area here. They're around. The Indians were very much part of this area. I have a couple of books here which deal, well, one really. This is an atlas of New York State done a few years ago, which has a couple of pages on Indians. They, of course, dwell primarily with the Iroquois, but it's got some great maps for the whole history, not just the Indians, which might be of considerable interest to some of you. Another interesting book, pamphlet, is Historical Society. I think there's a phone in the open. Oh, go ahead and talk here. Anyone who knows where Pocahontas is doing pretty well. Anyway, it's entitled Indians of the Weaverton Valley. Weaverton Valley, of course, just left it. And this touches on some things. It's, to a large degree, very prosaic in my approach. But again, some of you might be interested in reading some of it. It talks about some of the tribes around here. The Chattahoochee, of course, was 10. So broader. They wound up in Kent, incidentally. The Chattahoochee Reservation, which I think has one Indian living out now, does it? I printed in the newsletter this month, and I hope some of you had a chance to read it, an article called The Indian Relationship to Plant Life. I'm glad to say tonight we have Ian Dessler here from Unionville, Historical Society, who I'm sure that he's quite an expert on natural vegetation and the uses of it. And she really should be the one talking about this, because this is what the Indians did. The Indians lived off the land totally. They had to, with the exception of a few crops like corn, which they had to plant, and beans. But everything else they got from the land around them. Different trees serve different purposes, whether it may be food for boats or bark for medicine for food. It's extremely interesting, and I hope we can get into this in the spring, because it opens up a real world for I'm sure many of us, for me it does. All the things you can get out of the walking through the woods, you can live there. There's an interesting book, any of you who have children, entitled My Side of the Mountain. And it's about a boy who lives in New York City, who runs away, which is, I suppose, the dream of all boys about 12. And he goes, he was to Nashville, anyway, up to a wooded area, somewhere in this general vicinity, and spends a year all by himself. He hollows out of a tree and lives in these trees. And he captures a falcon, which he trains, and the falcon hunts for him. And he's kind of sneaky in some ways. He doesn't hunt deer himself, but what he does is when hunters come through the area and kill a deer, but very often they'll just kill the deer and leave it, in which case they'll get, or else no,
or something like that. Yeah, they frequently do that.
If I gave you a chance to go on for hours. But he also was, when they shot a deer, of course, in some rain, before they were able to get through the deer, he'd drag it away and hide it. It's a really neat book, but he goes into a lot of these things. How he got salt, for example. How, got all sorts of different foods, which sustained him through the very harsh winter up the mountain. And here he is, only a boy of 12. It's a really interesting book about this. As time goes by, I hope we can assemble more information on the Indian of this area. There are a number of stories that I'm aware and part of. I'm sure all the people who are native here know about Dover, Stone Church in Dover. And there's a story about that place. Indian chief who I think was in a battle over in Connecticut and was being chased by opponents and fled into the Stone Church. And there's a throne like cloth there. And the story is that he hid there until somebody was ready to finally left. There are stories which are just more fully authenticated about Indians who lived in Comico, over in Sharon Valley, over in this area, who were ministered to by Indians. All of them were wound up dying off. Because not real killed. That's one of the nice things about this area is there wasn't really that much violence as an entry you get elsewhere. But nevertheless, the church doesn't want people. Well, it's true. Measles, exactly. Smallpox, the common cold, through all of these things that the whites were not totally